Hello everyone. A lot of people want to read Deleuze, in particular Deleuze and Guattari's Anti-Oedipus and 1,000 Plateaus, but upon opening the text, they'll either find him impenetrable or even completely nonsensical. And this is very normal, not because Deleuze is writing nonsense, he very much is not, but because Deleuze is working within a line of critical philosophy that has turned so much that is intuitive to human beings living under capitalism on its head, ethically, metaphysically, and even mechanically. Your very capacity for correctly perceiving things in the world with your own two eyes, the screen in front of you, the people you talk to, your own body, all of these things are going to be directly challenged in some pretty radical ways. To put it bluntly, Deleuze is way in the deep end of the pool, and if you just jump in without any swimming lessons or a lifeguard, you're going to feel like you're drowning. And I can say this because that's exactly what happened to me. With that in mind, as someone whose education was in political philosophy and who had a hell of a time getting to a point where I could make head or tail of what Deleuze is talking about, I've put together a reading list of philosophy to help you get ready to be able to read and understand somewhat Anti-Oedipus after just 1 year, significantly faster than it took me. If you follow this list, you're going to be going through a lot of philosophy. So before I begin, a caveat. Take your time. Let yourself be slow. Let it take 2 years if necessary. Hell, let it take 3. It's okay. You will find things that you are interested in as you go that you hadn't even imagined possible from when you started. Things you will be very glad that you didn't miss by rushing. It's not about the destination. Deleuze is not the end of philosophy. It really is about the journey. And if you take your time to read carefully and to actually try to understand, dwell on, and engage with the philosophers mentioned in this list, you'll be able to read Deleuze better, yes, but you'll also be able to access so much more than that. Worlds will open up. So don't rush. Don't push yourself, don't exhaust yourself. Go at your own pace. With that said, the following will assume a reading pace of roughly 20 pages per day, give or take based on the density of the material. Don't be dogmatic about that. That's just what I aim for when I give general rough estimates of how long it'll take you to complete some section or other. So, without further ado, let's begin the quest to sorta kinda understand Anti-Oedipus by Deleuze and Guattari. First, you're going to start by reading some Immanuel Kant, in particular his Critique of Pure Reason. What you're going to read specifically is the 2 prefaces. They're combined in most editions, don't worry, and the chapter on the transcendental aesthetic. What you're going to pay special attention to is the way Kant frames human thought and experience as necessarily conditioned by the practical needs of an animal life form, like humanity is. This is going to be the running theme between all of the books on this list. Human thought and perception are conditioned by our environment, and that includes our biological history as embodied creatures living in the world with bodily needs. Our senses and cognition are oriented towards satisfying those needs, not toward a metaphysical truth beyond mere animal interest. More importantly, this book will introduce you to the method of critique, which isn't merely the act of criticizing something, like we say in common parlance when we point out what's wrong with some piece of media, like, that Marvel movie really sucked. That's not what critique is. Critique, as opposed to criticizing, involves analyzing and unwrapping the implications and presumptions inherent in an idea, notion, or concept. Depending on the edition of Kant you use, you're roughly looking at about 100 to 120 or 30 pages of material. This should take you probably 2 weeks to a month. Next, we're going to move on to Bergson. Henri Bergson. Deleuze is massively influenced by 2 philosophers, as you will see very quickly reading anything by Deleuze, Friedrich Nietzsche and Henri Bergson. Specifically, their respective critiques of dualism and mechanistic thinking as being 2 sides of the same erroneous coin, and then their respective conceptions of things as being actually formed of multiplicities. Nietzsche and Bergson are obviously very, very different, but they're similar in ways that you will pick up very quickly. Think of Bergson as a happier Nietzsche in some respects. The books are going to pick up are Bergson's Time and Free Will, Matter and Memory, and Creative Evolution. There are lots of cheap editions of these books online. I recommend the Dover editions personally. The type is good, and they are reasonably priced. You don't need to worry about translations with Bergson. All the English translations are by the same guy. And Bergson, I believe, actually oversaw them, so you can more or less trust them. Zone Books does publish a very pretty edition of Matter and Memory that is well produced physically, but it has several typos that I found, and it's significantly more expensive. I would go with the Dover. Together, all 3 volumes amount to a little under 900 pages. Again, don't be intimidated. This is a long journey, and you should take your time and savor every stop. Bergson is massively worthwhile and influential in his own right, even outside of Deleuze. He is very worth spending your time on. Again, if it takes you 3 months to read these, that's fine. If it takes you longer, that's fine. Don't be afraid to extend your reading schedule. It's more important that you read these things well and benefit from them than burn yourself out setting arbitrary deadlines for yourself. Now, when you've read these 3 books by Bergson, Time and Free Will, Matter and Memory, and Creative Evolution, celebrate by reading Deleuze's book Bergsonism. At roughly 110 pages, this should take you roughly 1 to 2 weeks. And congratulations, once you've done this, you've read your first full book by Deleuze. Our next stop is Spinoza. You'll know why Spinoza matters after having read carefully through Bergson, don't worry, but the short of it is that Spinoza is going to introduce a concept of desire that doesn't involve lack. I.e., when we talk about desire in Deleuze, we are not talking about something that someone wants that they don't have. We're talking fundamentally about a kind of connection that is always there. Don't worry about this for now, you'll get it when you get there, but what you're actually going to read is a book called A Spinoza Reader, edited and translated by Edwin Curley. This contains the full text of Spinoza's Ethics, the authoritative translation of that book, the major book by Spinoza that we're interested in here. But more importantly, this volume in particular comes with supplementary material that forms basically a small course in Spinoza with selections from more or less all of Spinoza's earlier major works that will make the ethics much more clear and digestible. Read this volume from front to back and read the notes and supplementary material. Again, take your time, absorb it, engage with it, dwell on it. It's okay. Now, when you've finished reading A Spinoza Reader, celebrate by reading Spinoza Practical Philosophy by Deleuze. Again, this short book should take you 1 to 2 weeks if you're reading carefully. This is also technically your first book on Nietzsche, by the way, who is the philosopher we're going to dive into next. Now, for Nietzsche, it is critical that you take your time and you do your best to get him before you move on. So my recommendation is to start with his later book, Twilight of the Idols, which is, compared to his more aphoristic works, we'll get into that in a moment, relatively conventional in its writing, and serves as a good general introduction to most of his more important philosophical positions. Following this, you're going to read The Gay Science. This is one of those aphoristic works. This book is structured as a series of aphorisms. Small thoughts, almost in the form of poetic little notes, but don't take them any less seriously for that. This is dense material. Following this, read Beyond Good and Evil, and then On the Genealogy of Morality. All combined, you're looking at, again, roughly 900 to 1,000 pages, depending on what editions you get. To get the most bang for your buck, I recommend 2 volumes. The Portable Nietzsche, published by Viking, and The Basic Writings of Nietzsche, published by Random House, both translated by Walter Kaufmann. Kaufmann also has his own translation of The Gay Science, although the Cambridge is also perfectly good. The important thing isn't to get the best translation humanly possible. The best translation isn't like a trophy. Remember, books are tools for learning and research. Even a bad translation can be extremely useful, perhaps even more useful. Sometimes problems in translation that spur on debates about proper translations of terms and concepts and so on and so forth actually help to direct your attention to really important elements of a piece of writing that you otherwise would just skirt by. Again, you're not reading Nietzsche here to finish reading Nietzsche. This is just about making sure that you have the basic tool set to be able to understand later material that engages with Nietzsche and Nietzsche's concepts and Nietzsche's methodologies. That said, Kaufmann's translations are actually quite decent, perfectly serviceable, even quite good, and you will get a very good understanding of Nietzsche's philosophy if you read these volumes carefully and you also read the supplementary material and the notes. Now, as before, once you've read these books by Nietzsche, celebrate by reading Deleuze's book Nietzsche and Philosophy. Again, give yourself 1 to 2 weeks. Take your time, and this one, by the way, is very good, so enjoy it. So at this point, I'm going to advise you to take sort of a break and look back on your progress. No matter how long it's taken you, 3 months, 6 months, maybe a year, by the time you get to this stage, you will have read a solid 2,300 or more pages of really dense philosophy, really interesting dense philosophy. And, get this, you will have read more than 3 whole books by Deleuze already. This is something very few people manage to achieve in life. Feel good about it. This is also a good opportunity to get off the train for a little bit and dig into some other philosophers as well, sort of explore the terrain. Here are some suggested side quests, quote-unquote. I recommend doing at least one before you continue. So, for example, you could explore some other critical theory. By this point, you are more than well enough equipped to read and understand philosophers like Judith Butler, Simone de Beauvoir, Maurice Merleau-Ponty, Martin Heidegger, Jean-Paul Sartre, and Michel Foucault, and so on. Again, go slow. None of these theorists are easy, but you're able to tread water now. Here are some example texts you could try. Some of the shorter books, like Gender Trouble, you could probably read carefully in a week or two. Others, like Simone de Beauvoir's The Second Sex or Jean-Paul Sartre's Being and Nothingness, will probably take you upwards of 1 month to 2, maybe even 3 by themselves. And that's okay. Alternatively, you could go back into some classical political philosophy. If you haven't read Plato, Aristotle, Hobbes, or Rousseau, this is a great opportunity to get acquainted with some of the major objects of critique by all of the aforementioned authors, as well as their intellectual forebears. Plato's Republic, Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, Hobbes' Leviathan, and Rousseau's Discourses and his Social Contract are all very worthwhile reading that will deeply enrich and help situate the rest of your reading so far. You could probably get through all of the books on the screen now in 3 or so months if you dedicate the time, maybe less. Or you could go back and keep on reading Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. There's a lot of good stuff in there. Alternatively, read some more Nietzsche. In fact, personally, that's the one I would choose. Take a month, take on Nietzsche's other major books, such as Thus Spake Zarathustra, The Antichrist, or Ecce Homo. You could even, if you're feeling particularly bold, take a swing at some other books by Deleuze, such as Kant's Critical Philosophy, or Cinema 1 and 2 if you were really taken by Bergson, and I don't blame you, or even try The Logic of Sense if you're feeling brave. Side note, whatever you choose to do, always, and I know I sound like a broken record, always read the supplementary material. Not only does it often contain invaluable historical and background information giving you a general history of the period, as much as of the philosopher's work and of how people have engaged with it through time. Especially when a piece of writing is in translation, it is extremely important to know what decisions the editors and translators made in rendering the text into the specific language that they did. Old books, in particular, that are translated from other languages must be treated as if they are new, at least as new as the translation you are reading, because they are new. They aren't the actual old book, they're someone's rendition, read in the light of other work that was around at the time. And so it is very important to know how translators changed a text to make it more readable for people reading in their own time and place. Well, we've diverted long enough. Back onto the train. We are continuing the main quest line. And moving forward towards Anti-Oedipus. Next, we are stopping at Karl Marx. You're going to read some Karl Marx. In particular, you're going to read the Economic and Philosophical Manuscripts of 1844 and Part 1 of Capital. Not all of Volume 1, don't worry, just Part 1 of Volume 1 on the commodity, which is a little over 100 pages. We are interested in commodity doubling, how individual objects of exchange that are used as tools, or what Marx calls use values, are transformed into exchange values, or commodities, products that are created en masse for exchange and that are interchangeable with each other. For example, this hammer that I use, this particular hammer, versus a given model of this hammer exchanged as an abstraction en masse on the market. We are also interested in the ways commodities are fetishized, invested with properties through exchange as commodities that they do not have as mere physical objects. For example, as money. As far as editions are concerned, I recommend the Dover edition of the Manuscripts and the New Princeton translation of Capital Volume 1, which is not only beautiful in construction, but comes with excellent supplementary material that should clarify a lot. I also find the language relatively clear compared to the Penguin edition. You should be able to read all of this in about 2 or 3 weeks. Next up is Georges Bataille, specifically his books The Accursed Share, Volume 1, and his collection of essays, Visions of Excess. In particular, what we are interested in is an analysis drawn from Nietzsche of an economy based on debt, whose level of analysis is called general economy, concerned with the flow and capture of energy from the sun by organisms on Earth. We are also interested in his theory of life, specifically of the way life fills explosively a space, builds upon its own constructions to increase that space, and then when the total amount of usable space is fully occupied, relies on violent death to clear up old, already colonized space in order for life to continue its activity in the absence of new territories. Now, do you want to take on the boss early? At this point, you might just want to attempt Anti-Oedipus, and you can. I'm not going to recommend that you do, but you can. Before you do, though, I'm going to recommend a philosopher that you probably haven't heard of before, but who is going to massively improve your reading of Anti-Oedipus. Pierre Klazowski. Specifically, Klazowski's essays Living Currency and Sade and Fourier, which are both published under the title Living Currency by Bloomsbury. This should take you a week at most. That said, I personally find Klazowski's writing even harder than Deleuze's at his most complicated. So give yourself as much time as you need. 1 week, 2 weeks, even 3 weeks. However, through these essays, what you will get is an ingenious application of the concept of perversion, taken from the Marquis de Sade, that will be put to great use in Anti-Oedipus, especially in the critique of state despotism. Now, while we're here, let's consider some additional possible side quests that will make your reading of Anti-Oedipus just that much better. If you spent your first side quest period reading more Nietzsche, I would recommend some more Klazowski, in particular Nietzsche and the Vicious Circle by Klazowski. Warning, this is a roughly 2-week read at minimum, and it is dense, but it is very good. Arguably the best book on Nietzsche ever written. Alternatively, take a D.H. Lawrence side quest. Read D.H. Lawrence's books, published together in one volume, Psychoanalysis and the Unconscious and Fantasia of the Unconscious. Lawrence is better known as a novelist, but his Nietzschean critiques of psychoanalysis prefigure much of Deleuze and Guattari's critique of psychoanalysis, and he almost replicates Klazowski's use of Sade, albeit in a key that heavily resembles Bergson mixed with theosophy. It's a weird book that is full of scientific errors, but it's very rich in useful ideas, and Deleuze makes use of them. It is also, when compared to most of the other texts on this list, a relatively easy and fun read, so you could treat this as a bit of a break. Alternatively, again, go pursue some more Bataille. In particular, take the opportunity to read volumes 2 and 3 of The Accursed Share, published in one volume by Zone Books, as well as his book Eroticism or Erotism, depending on the edition, for a lot more interesting stuff about his philosophy of life, sexuality, and perversion. Or, someone we actually haven't covered on this list at all, you could go on a Hume side quest. Read David Hume's Treatise of Human Nature, and then, when you're finished, celebrate by reading Deleuze's book Empiricism and Subjectivity, an essay on Hume's Theory of Human Nature. A little more obscure, you could read On the Mode of Existence of Technical Objects by Gilbert Simondon. I'm not even going to begin to try and explain his relevance to Deleuze, but it's absolutely there, and it's very interesting. A little more controversially, you could try reading Deleuze's Difference and Repetition, provided you've completed your David Hume side quest and at some point you read Heidegger's Basic Writings and Being and Time, because it's responding to all these people. You're going to need your Spinoza, you're going to need your Bergson, you're going to need your Heidegger, you're going to need your Kant, all of them. This is a hard book, but heavily worth it, and if you can do it, if you can hack it, this will also massively contribute to your reading of Anti-Oedipus, certainly in terms of getting Deleuze's ontology. Now, after all of that, here we are. Whew, what a journey. If you've reached this point, you've been reading for roughly a year at least. Maybe 2, maybe 3 years. You've read thousands of pages of extremely difficult philosophy, and you've read it carefully. You sorta, kinda know this stuff, and that's impressive. Don't pat yourself on the back too hard, though. If you're serious about philosophy, you'll be rereading this stuff forever. That's the job, so to speak. But by this point, I can only imagine how eager you are to finally jump into Anti-Oedipus itself. Be warned, it will still be very difficult, and we've left out a lot of potential material that would enrich your reading of Anti-Oedipus even further. But you won't be finished with Anti-Oedipus, even if you've read it from cover to cover once. No, you're going to be going back. So don't worry, you'll get an opportunity to struggle with that other material too. But before I end off, I do want to talk about how difficult it is to read Anti-Oedipus for the first time, and especially about why that is. Because it's not just a very hard book, it's a very hard book for reasons that kinda suck. So also, if it takes you a long time to struggle through it, that's okay. That's very normal. But whatever you do struggle through it and don't try to cheat. There are lots of videos, for example, claiming to explain Deleuze on YouTube, and most of them are very bad. If you've ever picked up a copy of Anti-Oedipus already and tried to read it, you'll quickly see why they're very bad. Deleuze's writing is dense and difficult. It is also, by the way, probably not Deleuze's writing that you're reading. See, the original, I don't know if you can tell by Deleuze's name, is in French, which means you're going to be reading it in translation. And there is only one English translation available for Deleuze, and it's got problems. For example, in Anti-Oedipus in English, the word flux is mistranslated multiple times as flow, which gives the impression of water running down a pipe, so that for naive readers in English, it appears that Deleuze and Guattari are writing about the economy as if it was a big waterworks when they're actually talking about the flux of the economy. There's a different French word that they use, coulis, to actually refer to flow, and they distinguish these for a reason. Flows are unidirectional, it's like water down a pipe. Flux, by contrast, is not. This goes back to that whole desire as lack versus desire as connection thing we were talking about earlier. A connection along which drives are directed, but not in the sense of a literal fluid going down a conduit. These are just things to keep in mind when reading Anti-Oedipus in translation, but having the philosophy in this list under your belt will make it a lot easier to actually understand Deleuze, who is not entry-level stuff. But to be clear, this won't just make you able to read Deleuze. This will open up the door to you being able to engage with and profit from a huge amount of some other really advanced critical theorists as well. If it feels like you're going slow, that's okay. It takes time for everyone, and it's okay if it takes more time so long as you are taking the time to make sure you understand it, make sure you're engaging with it. In philosophy, it's more important to actually do the hard work of getting it, of understanding what you're reading and how it relates to the stuff around it, than to do it efficiently. To rush to the finish line in philosophy is to never get there at all. Again, this is one of those cases where keeping an attitude of, it's about the journey, not the destination, is so important, because it's the truth. And theorists as complicated and serious as Deleuze are simply not for people who rush. I hope you found this helpful. Happy reading, and as always, thank you for listening, and take care.
What am I gonna do?
Netanyahu's...
I'm
Benjamin Netanyahu's...
top guy. What am I gonna do?
Like, they weren't in the same century! Look at Rowling's Potter series and the Quidditch game. YouTube's wonderful praise Google. Ah!
Apparently,
Said before, it's a statute of limitations. Rats!